an energetic discussion about alternative options for the two sides. Oded, in his concluding report, said that at the end of the day, the United States is going to agree to cooperate in coordinating such processes between the two sides. Is this evaluation acceptable to you?
I think the President has been very clear, not only since his visit and in the days that have followed with Secretary Kerry's follow-up efforts, that unilateral measures by either side, whether they be the Palestinian efforts to upgrade their status at the United Nations or other international organizations, or settlement construction by Israel in disputed areas, are only going to be counterproductive, only going to be harmful to our goal. And the goal is to return the parties to direct negotiations toward the agreed outcome, which is a solution of two states for two peoples. That's the only solution to this conflict and the only way you can actually get to that solution. Now, there are a number of steps each side could take that could improve the atmosphere, that could build a certain amount of confidence, that could break down some of the mistrust that has prevented them from negotiating over the last 4 years. One might call some of those one-sided, maybe one-sided in a positive way, but if they're designed to reinforce the atmosphere required for negotiations, and then the negotiations themselves, and designed to prevent new elements from coming in that actually complicate the very issues that are being negotiated, obviously those can be useful. That is the focus. The focus is to return to those negotiations. If the parties find ways they can improve that atmosphere, that's to be encouraged. But clearly what we've seen in the past has been a series of unilateral actions that have had the opposite effect, and we're trying to discourage that approach.
Thank you.
We've got time for two questions, brief questions. I hope to be able to see something from here. If the questions are not addressed into a mic, we won't be able to translate them. We've learned from Obama's visit that the United States is not going to sit idly by if there is any usage of nuclear weapons. What is the meaning behind that?
To ask the ambassador about Kerry's timetable that he laid in the Senate. Do you agree, or does the White House also agree, that we're talking about a 2 years timetable before the window of opportunities on two-state solution will close?
On the first question, the President articulated, I think, about not quite a year ago, maybe it was last August, that while we are clearly planning for a range of contingencies around the Syrian chemical weapons capability, which is an extensive capability, and there are many dangers associated with the collapse of the regime, such as the weapons could be transferred to a party like Hezbollah. The weapons could fall out of the control of the regime into the hands of a non-state actor, or perhaps a jihadist group. What would change the calculus for him are indications that the regime was prepared to use those weapons or using those weapons against their own people. There obviously have been a number of reports at various times in the intervening months that require full investigation. And we are investigating those reports, and we are seeking the fullest and most accurate assessments of our intelligence community and in consultation with others to determine what has happened. That remains a critical, unacceptable line that we do not want to see crossed. I won't be able to, and I won't speculate on the kinds of contingencies that are prepared for such a situation. But I would say that this was very much part of Secretary Hagel's conversations with Minister Ya'alon while he was here. And he, as Secretary of Defense, is charged with ensuring that those contingencies are available to the President should the evidence point in that direction. On the question of how much time there is to achieve a two-state solution, I think what we can safely say is that this is not a problem that gets easier with time. This is a problem that gets harder with time. There are attitudes that shift from support to doubt to maybe disillusionment about the likelihood of being able to achieve a two-state solution. It's my assessment, and I think most public opinion polling would back this up, that the majority, significant majority of Israelis and the significant majority of Palestinians continue to desire a two-state solution as the outcome that would end this conflict and achieve their needs. But more and more of them on both sides are growing doubtful and disillusioned that that is possible. The longer time passes without successful negotiations and the more conditions change, some on the ground, some in the international scene, some with the views each side has of its respective partner. And so this doesn't get easier to solve with time. It gets harder to solve with time. And that's why there is a certain degree of urgency to resume this process and resume these negotiations and resume the step-by-step building of two states for two people solutions that allows Palestinians to achieve their rights of self-determination with all the institutions of a Palestinian state and that maintains Israeli security and that resolves the other outstanding issues between them. So we don't know exactly how much time, and I think it's something that different people can look at different data points and measure it differently. But we know that time is becoming a factor in our ability to achieve that outcome.
Avi, would you like to say something about one of those two questions? Okay, I would like to take 1.5 minutes. My competitive edge in quote unquote is that I can speak very rapidly. I would like to say something from the academic. We are talking about American mediation, American processes. We have to understand that historically speaking, there is the American mediation. Sorry, I can't hear him. The microphone gets disconnected. The American efficiency is mostly expressed in situations of end of war. Here, an American pressure, even concentrated pressure on Israel could be useful because this is a volatile situation that can escalate and drag the whole region. That is why we see an optimum success or a maximum success of the Americans in 56, 67, 73. In low-intensity wars, it's less accentuated, but there is a certain timetable and a certain deadline. In the other situations of, for example, a transition towards peace arrangements, the American success was more minor. They initiated interim arrangements, Kissinger in 1975, etc. But I would say that in the like what Ben Miller defines as the transition from a Cold War to a cold peace or formal peace agreements, as cold as they are, this has to start taking shape in the area itself. The Americans have always defined themselves as facilitators, as mediators, as remuneration agents, like he did in the first Camp David in the peace accords with Egypt, and half a year later. But I'm saying that the Israeli-Jordanian October 94 peace agreement, they complained that the Americans were too much involved in it. Oslo, for better or for worse, this grew in the local theater. So I would say that you can delineate an American plan, which would be very impressive. We can go back to the roadmap, etc. But the basis has always been in the area itself. And as for the explicit idea of an enforced arrangement, the only one that I can remember was very pathetic in October 77 between the superpowers that said that, but it was disintegrated within 4 days. And apart from a single expression, I think that this is not on the agenda at all. So let's not forget that with all the importance of any American administration throughout the years, especially in rewarding and positively reinforcing the parties, I think that we can't ignore the maturing that should happen here at home, in our theater, in our space. There is no substitute for it. This is a prerequisite.
David, so you want to react to some of the questions?
Let me just make a brief comment on the chemical weapons question that came up at the beginning. This is a pretty complex issue operationally for the U.S. And first, there's the determination of whether or not the red line's been crossed, and I think we can argue about whether or not the Obama administration has been very reluctant to declare a red line crossed here or not, and that depends on how one reads the intel. But even if the U.S. had to go in and go do this, it's important to remember how much more complex it is to deal with chemical weapons than in some ways it is to deal with nuclear weapons programs and so forth. You can pick nuclear weapons up, assuming that they are not in contest, and fly them out. It's taken the United States about 20 years to get rid of its own chemical weapons stockpiles. It had to burn them off. Obviously, there are huge environmental concerns here. It's been done to EPA standards, in the United States, which I'm sure has probably slowed it down. But it's a very messy, very dangerous job. And from everything that we can tell, Syria's stockpile is probably a little bit larger than what the U.S. had when it started the process. So the concept that one could come in and rid Syria of this very quickly is something I think we probably ought to sort of stop and think about. And doing it under a hostile situation would be even harder. So then the question is, who comes in to go do that? Is that the United States, which has greater technical capability? Is it Israel, which would raise all kinds of regional concerns? Is it the Arab League? Is it somebody else? And that's a tough question. On the question of the negotiations, I'm always struck by the fact that people in the United States keep going back to Bill Clinton's frequent statement that we understood within 4 or 5% what the final deal looks like, but you sort of just can't get to that. And I think it is a reasonable question to ask whether the more time goes on, the bigger that percentage increases. In other words, whether the Clinton formula of what he thinks he understands a final deal would be actually still exists as the deal that's out there.
Thank you.
Oded, you have 90 seconds to answer, a lot of time. Maybe the right thing to do would be to remind everybody the mark given by Professor Avi Ben-Zvi to the report of the team. He said that it was brilliant, but I can't overcome my desire to employ these 80 seconds. The problem is in those gray areas on the two major issues that are today on the agenda between the United States and Israel, the Iranian one and the Palestinian one. We think, and I think, that there are too many gray areas, and we have to try to reduce these gray areas. And as for the Palestinian issue, my question to the ambassador, and we are going to keep on discussing it with him, what happens at the end of Kerry's check when he finds out that the two parties, for the different reasons, especially the internal political situation, does not allow to get into negotiations for a full arrangement. Is Israel going to conclude that in order to save the Jewish democracy, it's going to go to a unilateral process? What can be done between the Israelis and Americans in order to get to bilateral understandings, American assistance to get two unilateral paths that converge into something common with the Palestinians? As for the Iranian point, we have talked about it the whole day long. There are gray areas where there is a dimension of lack of clarity. The president is not bluffing, that's true, but the truths are changing, the conditions are changing, and when the president is going to have to take a choice, despite all his statements, he can be in a situation because of budgetary constraints, because of the tiredness of the Americans. He can say, I promised, but right now I can't, or I don't want to. The Americans don't want these gray areas relating to what happens if this is not exactly what has been planned. Two big gray areas, and I think that in the continuous dialogue between us and the American administration, we have to reduce these gray areas. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists in the session. Thank you, Shlomo, Oded, the American ambassador, David Senin, and Professor Ben-Zvi.